It was the 5th weekend straight. My sister dumped her kids on my doorstep and disappeared. I finally told her, "I'm not your on-demand babysitter." And she exploded. She blasted our parents, yelled that I was betraying family, and slammed the call. An hour later, flashing red and blue lit up my living room, and the police were at my door. Can you imagine having your own sister weaponize the police against you? Accusing you of child abandonment, just because you dared to say no to being her free, live-in babysitter? It's a story I never thought I'd share, a brutal tale of betrayal, and reclaiming my life from the very people who were supposed to love me most. 4 years, all I, Alex, a 29-year-old, wanted was a little peace. I'd worked hard, saved every penny, and finally bought my own small townhouse. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. A sanctuary, I thought, after years of family chaos. What I didn't count on was my older sister, Chloe, deciding my independence meant I was now her personal safety net. Or, as she liked to put it, the fun uncle who doesn't mind helping out. But it never felt like helping. It felt like being used, drained dry, and then discarded. Chloe, 31, has 2 kids, 6-year-old twins. They're good kids, don't get me wrong. But they're a whirlwind of energy with zero bedtime discipline and a knack for breaking anything within reach. I love them, but I also know my limits. Chloe, however, had none. Ever since her breakup, she'd been pawning them off on me at every opportunity. What started as the occasional weekend quickly spiraled into every weekend, then Friday through Sunday, and sometimes, unbelievably, even weekdays when she had plans. It all came crashing down one chilly Saturday morning. I just settled onto my couch, coffee in hand, ready for a day of glorious quiet, when my doorbell exploded. I already had that familiar sinking feeling. Sure enough, there stood Chloe, hair done up like she was hitting the town, her kids fidgeting beside her. She didn't even bother with greetings. "Hey, thanks again, Alex," she chirped, already turning to leave. I blinked at her, still groggy. "Wait, what? I didn't agree to this." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, come on. You love spending time with them. I'll pick them up tomorrow evening." And just like that, she was gone. Her heels clacking down my walkway before I could even get another word out. That was the 4th weekend in a row. The twins ran inside, dumping their backpacks in the hall, and I just stood there stunned. A heavy knot tightened in my chest. Resentment mixed with a sickening guilt. I loved those kids, but I hated being cornered. I hated how Chloe made me feel like I had no choice, like my time wasn't my own. I swore I'd talk to her. But when Sunday rolled around, she was too busy to chat. She scooped up the twins, blew me a kiss, and sped off. The 5th weekend was worse. Much worse. She didn't just drop them off. She did it like I was a public daycare. No knock, no explanation. I heard a commotion, opened the door, and caught a glimpse of her car pulling out of my driveway. The kids stood on my porch like 2 abandoned packages. I watched her taillights disappear, speechless. That's when something snapped inside me. Not in front of the kids. No, but internally. I realized Chloe didn't see me as her brother. She saw me as free, readily available childcare. And when I finally called her later that night to tell her enough was enough, that I wasn't their built-in babysitter, she didn't even try to hide her fury. "Are you kidding me, Alex?" she screamed through the phone. "You have no idea how hard it is being a single mom. You sit there in your nice little house with no responsibilities, no kids, no partner. Your life is easy. The least you could do is help your own family." I tried to stay calm, but my voice shook. "I won't keep doing this, Chloe. I'm not saying I'll never help, but I can't give up every single weekend. I need my own life, too." The line went silent for a beat. I thought, maybe, just maybe, she was calming down. Then she hissed, "Fine. If you won't step up, maybe Sarah and Robert should know what kind of selfish son they raised." An hour later, my parents, Sarah and Robert, were calling me, demanding to know why I was abandoning my sister. I tried to explain, but Sarah cut me off. "You're single, Alex. You don't have real responsibilities. Of course, you should help." The anger in my chest burned hotter than ever. My whole life, Chloe had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was always the one expected to bend, to adjust, to give up my time and energy, all because you don't have kids, so you wouldn't understand. I thought I could shrug it off. But then came the part that made my blood run cold. Just when I thought the storm had passed, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, 2 uniformed police officers stood on my porch. "Are you Alex Green?" one asked. My heart plummeted. "Yes," I managed, my voice tight. The taller officer, Jenkins, nodded gravely. "We've received a call about a potential abandonment situation. Do you mind if we step inside?" That's when I realized my sister had crossed a line I didn't think even she was capable of. The moment those words left Officer Jenkins' mouth, my stomach turned to stone. "Abandonment situation?" I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. Behind me, the twins were in the living room, loudly arguing over a tablet. Their laughter and shrieks echoed through the house, completely at odds with the seriousness unfolding at my front door. Officer Jenkins stepped inside. I instinctively moved back, still in shock. The other officer, Davies, glanced around, taking in the toys scattered across the floor. Jenkins' expression softened when he saw the kids, clearly healthy and safe, but his tone remained professional. "We got a call from a relative expressing concern that the children may have been left unattended or neglected." I felt heat rising in my face. "What? That's insane. They're my niece and nephew. My sister dropped them off this morning, without even asking me, like she always does. They've been with me all day. I've been taking care of them." I gestured towards the living room. Davies raised an eyebrow. Jenkins jotted something in his notepad. "Do you mind if we ask the kids a couple of questions?" he asked. My instinct was to protest. I didn't want them dragged into this, but I also didn't want to look defensive. "Sure, go ahead." The officers crouched down. They asked simple things. Names, how long they'd been at Uncle Alex's, if they'd eaten, if they felt safe. The twins answered cheerfully, completely oblivious. "Uncle Alex gave us pancakes, and we watched cartoons," one chirped proudly. Jenkins nodded, satisfied. He stood, facing me again. "Looks like they're well taken care of." I think this was a misunderstanding. But I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. Chloe had weaponized the police against me. After the officers left, assuring me no further action would be taken, I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I called Chloe. She picked up on the second ring, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "Oh, the cops came? Well, good. Maybe now you'll take your role more seriously." "My role?" I snapped. "Chloe, I'm your brother, not your babysitter. You can't just dump your kids on me whenever you feel like it and then call the police on me when I draw a boundary." She laughed. A cold, sharp sound. "Boundaries? You don't get to have boundaries, Alex. You don't have a family of your own, so you don't know what sacrifice is. You owe me this. You owe Sarah and Robert for everything they did for us." That word, oh, stuck in my brain like a splinter. The next weekend, I thought maybe she'd give me space. Maybe after the police fiasco, she'd back off. But no. Friday evening, she pulled into my driveway with the twins. Didn't even bother to knock. Just hunked until I came outside. When I didn't immediately open the door, she marched up and started banging on it like she owned the place. I opened the door a crack. "I'm not doing this anymore," I told her flat out. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get to say no." She shoved the twins' backpacks at me. "You're taking them." "I have plans." I didn't move to take the bags. The twins, sensing the tension, shuffled awkwardly behind her. "Chloe, listen to me carefully," I said, my voice low but firm. "I am not responsible for your choices. If you have plans, you need to make arrangements. Not me." She exploded. "Do you know how selfish you sound? You've always been like this, lazy, unhelpful, hiding in your little world while I carry the real weight. Sarah and Robert agree with me. They told me you're being ridiculous." And she wasn't lying. That same night, Sarah called, her voice sharp with disappointment. "Alex, why are you making things so difficult? Your sister needs you. Those children need you. Why can't you just step up?" I tried explaining again how often Chloe was using me, how it wasn't just once in a while, it was constant. But Sarah cut me off. "You don't understand because you've never had to sacrifice for anyone. You've always been the one we had to push. Your sister has always been stronger, more responsible. This is your chance to finally prove you're part of this family." Her words landed like punches. Stronger, more responsible. That was always Chloe, according to them. I was the one who needed to prove myself, no matter how much I achieved. Never mind that I was the first to graduate college, the one who bought my own home without a cent from them. None of it mattered. The favoritism wasn't new, but this time, it burned deeper. It wasn't just about words. They were actively undermining me, siding with Chloe as she trampled over my life. The following week, I started getting texts from Robert too, echoing the same message. It's family, Alex. You don't turn your back on family. When I didn't respond, he sent another. Don't make us regret raising you. I felt like I was drowning. Every time I stood up for myself, the weight of their disapproval pulled me under. And Chloe knew it. She started using that favoritism as a weapon. When I refused to watch the twins one night, she showed up at my house anyway, parked the car in my driveway, and shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Guess Uncle Alex doesn't care if his niece and nephew starve. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to shut the world out. But more than anything, I felt the first flicker of something else. Something sharp, cold, and focused. I was done being their doormat. And that was the moment when the idea of turning the tables on all of them first began to form in my mind. The breaking point came 2 weeks later on what was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday. I had just come home from work, exhausted, looking forward to reheating leftovers and zoning out on the couch. The house was quiet, just how I liked it. But as I walked up to my front door, I froze. There, sitting on my porch, were the twins. Alone. Their little backpacks propped against the wall, a grocery bag beside them with what looked like pajamas stuffed inside. My stomach dropped. They waved at me cheerfully, like this was completely normal. Hi, Uncle Alex, one chirped. Mom said we're having a sleepover. I was stunned. Where's your mom? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. They shrugged, pointing vaguely down the street. She said she had to run errands. She told us to wait here because you'd be home soon. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door and ushered them inside. The idea that Chloe had left her 6-year-olds sitting unattended on my porch for who knows how long made me feel sick. Anything could have happened. I called her immediately, my voice trembling with fury. She picked up after several rings, sounding breathless, like she'd just parked somewhere crowded. Relax. They're fine, she said dismissively. You're overreacting. They were safe on your porch. It's not like you live in a bad neighborhood. Are you out of your mind? I yelled. They're 6 years old, Chloe. You left them alone on a doorstep. Do you have any idea what could have happened? She scoffed. Oh, please. You act like I abandoned them in a field. You're being dramatic. They knew you'd be home soon. Stop acting like the hero. You're just their uncle, not their parent. You don't understand the kind of sacrifices I make every day. That word again, sacrifices. Like leaving her kids unattended was something noble. I wanted to slam the phone down, but before I could, she delivered the real betrayal. Her voice dropped into that syrupy, manipulative tone I knew too well. Honestly, Alex, if you can't handle watching them, maybe I'll just call CPS myself. Tell them you don't want to care for your own family. See how that looks? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was she threatening to weaponize the system against me again? After everything, I had barely processed the first time she dragged the police into this mess. The thought of her actually filing something with Child Protective Services sent a chill down my spine. Are you serious? I whispered. You're the one making this hard, she snapped. You think you're so independent with your little house and your boring job, but the truth is you wouldn't last a day in my shoes. I need help, and you're going to give it to me, whether you like it or not. And if I have to get Sarah and Robert involved, or anyone else, I will. I felt something inside me crack. This wasn't just about babysitting anymore. This wasn't even about family. This was control. Chloe had decided my life wasn't mine to live, and my parents were right there behind her, ready to prop her up, no matter what line she crossed. That night, after I put the twins to bed, I sat in the dark living room, my head in my hands. I thought about every time I'd been forced to swallow my pride, every time I'd been made to feel lesser, every time my accomplishments had been brushed aside because Chloe needed something. And now this, leaving her kids on a porch, threatening to call CPS, making me the villain in a story where she was the one destroying trust. I realized then that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just taking advantage of me. She had betrayed me in a way I couldn't undo. My own sister had turned me into a pawn in her game of excuses and manipulation. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, the next day proved me wrong. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Alex, we need to talk. Chloe told us what you said last night. We are very disappointed. If you can't be responsible, maybe you shouldn't have the kids over at all." I stared at the message, my pulse hammering in my ears. My own parents, without even asking me what happened, had sided with Chloe again. Worse, they believed her version of events, where I was the irresponsible one. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living under their control, under her thumb. Something inside me hardened. That night, it wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. But before I could figure out how to take back control, Chloe escalated even further, crossing a line I didn't think she would dare to cross. The real collapse began the following weekend. By then, I had already rehearsed in my head how I would stand firm if Chloe tried to drop the kids on me again. I told myself I'd lock the door, ignore her calls, whatever it took. I was determined to claw back some control. But the thing about people like my sister is they don't play fair. They change the rules before you even realize it. That Friday night, I came home late from work, my mind buzzing with exhaustion. As I pulled into my driveway, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My front porch light was on, and through the window, I could see shadows moving inside my house. My heart lurched. I thought someone had broken in. I ran to the door, fumbling with my keys, only to find the deadbolt already unlocked. I pushed inside and stopped dead. The twins were sprawled on my couch watching cartoons, half-eaten pizza boxes on the coffee table, juice spilled across the rug. And sitting at my dining table, scrolling on her phone like she owned the place, was Chloe. "Surprise," she said without even looking up. "The kids wanted to stay here tonight. And honestly, I needed a break. Don't worry, I already put them to bed once, but they got up. I couldn't even find my voice at first." "How? How did you get in?" She smirked, holding up the spare key I'd given Sarah years ago for emergencies. "You really shouldn't hide it in such an obvious place." Sarah told me where it was. I felt like the ground had been yanked out from under me. She had let herself into my house, uninvited, and made herself comfortable, like this was all part of the plan. I wanted to scream, but the twins were right there. So, I stood frozen, gripping the back of a chair, trying to swallow the storm building in my chest. "Chloe," I finally managed. "This is not okay. You cannot just come into my house whenever you feel like it. This is my home." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, get over yourself. You're always so dramatic. You live alone, Alex. What's the big deal? It's not like you're using the space for anything important. You should be grateful you get to spend time with your family." That word again, grateful. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. I sat in my bedroom that night, door locked, while Chloe snored on my couch. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. My sanctuary, my one safe space, had been invaded. It wasn't just weekends anymore. She had crossed into my daily life, and I was powerless to stop it. The next morning, she was gone, leaving behind a mess of crumbs, sticky plates, and 2 empty juice cartons. On the table sat a handwritten note in her rushed scrawl. "Thanks again. You're a lifesaver. I'll bring them by next week." I crumpled the note in my fist, my hands shaking. That's when the hopelessness hit me full force. For the next few days, I walked around like a ghost. At work, I couldn't focus. At home, I jumped at every noise, half expecting her to barge in again. I started locking the deadbolt, then double-checking it 3 times before bed. But I knew the key was still out there, still in her possession. My parents wouldn't listen if I complained. They'd tell me to stop overreacting. And the thought of confronting her again only filled me with dread, because every time I tried, she found a way to twist it back on me, to make me the bad guy. That week, during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the final straw snapped. We were all gathered around the table, and Chloe was going on and on about how amazing it was that I'd been so involved with the kids lately. She said it in this syrupy tone, but there was an edge to it, like she was daring me to contradict her. Sarah and Robert beamed with pride. "See," Sarah said, patting my arm. "You're finally stepping up, Alex. We're proud of you. For once." For once. The words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. I had done everything in my life on my own. My education, my house, my career. None of it mattered. What mattered was that I was finally being useful to Chloe. I didn't say a word during the rest of dinner. I just sat there, the noise around me fading into a dull roar, thinking about how I had become invisible in my own family. I wasn't a son or a brother anymore. I was a tool, a resource, a backup plan. That night, when I got home, I sank onto my couch in the dark. For the first time in years, I felt truly defeated. Not angry, not frustrated, just hollow. They had stripped me down to nothing. But even in that hollow space, a spark flickered. I realized I couldn't keep fighting them head-on. I'd never win that way. Chloe thrived on confrontation, and my parents were blind to her faults. If I was going to get out of this, if I was going to take back my life, I would have to be quiet, patient, careful. So I started planning. Not revenge yet. Not fully, but small steps. I changed my locks the next morning. I began keeping a journal, documenting every time Chloe dumped the kids on me, every message from my parents, every incident. I saved texts, screenshots, voicemails. It felt small, almost insignificant, but it gave me something I hadn't had in months, a sense of control. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Chloe wasn't done. She would push further, harder, until she got what she wanted. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The weeks that followed felt like breathing after being held underwater for too long. Changing the locks gave me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was craving. It was such a simple act, but when I closed the door and turned the new key in the lock, I finally felt like I had reclaimed a small piece of my life. That night, I slept without waking up every hour to check if Chloe had barged in again. With that first step, the others came more naturally. I started setting boundaries in subtle ways, not outright confrontations, but quiet lines that I controlled. When Chloe texted one Friday afternoon, "Picking you up a pizza, be ready for the kids," I didn't reply. Instead, I let the message sit there unanswered. For the first time, I turned off my phone and drove to a friend's house across town. We watched a movie, ordered Chinese, and laughed like I hadn't laughed in months. By the time I got home, my phone had 17 missed calls and 3 voicemails. Most of them from Chloe, alternating between fake sweetness and seething rage. But nothing happened. The world didn't end. The kids were fine because she'd had no choice but to take care of them herself. That single act of defiance lit something in me. I realized I had more control than I thought. Chloe's power only existed because I allowed her to dictate my time, my choices, my life. The moment I withdrew that permission, she was left scrambling. Around that time, I also started focusing more on myself again. Work had always been steady, but I hadn't been ambitious. I'd been too drained, too distracted. Now with my evenings slowly returning to me, I threw myself into a project I'd been putting off for months. I stayed late a few nights, polishing the presentation, crunching numbers, making sure every detail was airtight. When I finally presented it to my manager, he was impressed. 2 weeks later, I was offered a promotion. It wasn't just about the title or the raise, though that certainly helped. It was the validation. For once, someone looked at me and saw a value that had nothing to do with being Chloe's brother. I walked out of that meeting feeling taller, lighter, like I was finally stepping into my own life. My social circle grew again, too. Friends I'd quietly drifted away from during the chaos were happy to see me reaching out. I started saying yes to invitations again. Dinners, hikes, even a short weekend trip out of town. That trip especially felt like liberation. Standing on a quiet trail with no buzzing phone, no one pounding on my door, I realized how much I had let my family dictate my existence and how much joy I'd been missing. Even my home began to feel different. Where it had once felt like a prison, invaded and disrespected, I now made it my sanctuary again. I repainted the living room, got rid of the juice-stained rug, even bought myself a new couch. Small changes, but they reminded me that the space was mine. Mine to protect, mine to enjoy, mine to rebuild. Of course, Chloe didn't disappear. She still tried to dump the kids on me, still ranted when I refused, still dangled my parents' approval over my head like a weapon. But I didn't react the same way anymore. When she showed up one evening, banging on my door, I simply didn't answer. She called me 10 times in a row. I put my phone on silent and went back to cooking dinner. The power she once held slipped a little more with every boundary I enforced. My parents noticed the shift, too. At first, they scolded me. Sarah saying I was being cold, Robert warning me not to abandon family. But as weeks passed and Chloe's complaints grew more frantic, their calls became less accusatory and more uncertain. "Alex, maybe you could just talk to her," Sarah said one evening, her voice wavering. It was subtle, but for the first time, I felt a crack in the unshakable wall of favoritism that had defined my entire life. I didn't gloat, though. I stayed quiet, calm, collected. I knew better than to celebrate too soon. But inside, I felt stronger than I ever had before. And as my confidence grew, so did my plans. Every voicemail, every angry text, every manipulative message from Chloe or my parents, I kept saving them. My journal filled with dates, times, exact words, even small details that seemed irrelevant in the moment. I didn't know yet what I would do with all of it, but I knew it mattered. I knew it was building towards something bigger. Because while my life was finally improving, I could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Chloe wasn't used to losing control, and people like her don't go down quietly. I could sense it, the storm she was building. The only question was how far she would go to try to break me again. It happened almost by accident. I wasn't looking for leverage. I was just trying to reclaim pieces of my life. But sometimes when you step back, the truth has a way of surfacing in places you never expected. One evening after work, I stopped at a small cafe near my office. It had become my little ritual lately, a way to mark the end of the day before heading home. I was sipping coffee and scrolling through emails when I overheard two women at the table behind me talking about child custody cases. Normally, I would have tuned it out, but one of them mentioned documentation, how texts, call logs, and patterns of neglect were often the strongest evidence in court. Something clicked in my head. My journal, my screenshots, all the proof I'd been gathering. Up until then, I had been documenting everything almost as therapy, a way to reassure myself that I wasn't imagining things. But suddenly, I realized I wasn't just venting on paper. I was building a record that could be used if it came to that. That night, I dug deeper. I spent hours researching custody, neglect, abandonment. I read stories of parents who had lost rights because they repeatedly left their kids with others because they prioritized their personal lives over their children's safety. And with every line I read, my chest tightened. Chloe wasn't just irresponsible. What she was doing was dangerous. Leaving her kids on my porch, using me as free childcare, even threatening CPS as a weapon. If anyone was creating a case for themselves, it was her. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. If I wanted to, I could walk into a lawyer's office tomorrow and hand over a mountain of evidence showing exactly who Chloe was and what she had been doing. The thought scared me at first. These were my niece and nephew. We're talking about their mother. I didn't want to hurt them. Didn't want to drag them through something ugly. But as I sat there, staring at the stack of notes and screenshots spread across my desk, another feeling began to push its way through the fear resolve. Because as much as I loved those kids, I knew Chloe wasn't protecting them. She was using them. And if she kept spiraling, it was only a matter of time before they ended up in real danger. Meanwhile, things at work were blossoming. The promotion came with new responsibilities, and I rose to the challenge. I started traveling for meetings, networking with people I never would have met before. One night, over dinner with a colleague who used to work in family law, I casually mentioned a friend dealing with a difficult sibling. He didn't pry, but the advice he gave me stuck. The person with the most consistent record usually wins. Emotions can be spun in court. Facts can't. I filed that away. At the same time, Chloe's behavior was unraveling. The less I engaged, the more desperate she became. Her texts shifted from demands to guilt trips to outright threats. One read, "If you don't start pulling your weight, don't be surprised if Sarah and Robert cut you out completely." Another, "I swear, Alex, I'll make sure everyone knows how heartless you are. You'll regret this." I saved them all. The funny thing was, my parents were starting to notice her instability too, even if they wouldn't admit it outright. When Chloe stormed out of Sunday dinner after I calmly refused to take the twins for the week, Sarah sighed and said under her breath, "She's been stressed lately." It was the first time I'd ever heard even the faintest crack in their unwavering support of her. And I realized something else. Chloe had grown so used to being the golden child that she never thought she'd have to answer for her actions. She believed her word was enough, that Sarah and Robert would back her forever, that I would fold no matter what. But I had been patient, careful, deliberate. I was no longer the brother she could push around. I had a good job now, a solid home, a growing support network of friends. I wasn't the scared little sibling standing alone against her favoritism. I was stable. I was respected. And I had proof. Months worth of it, ready to be used if she tried to drag me down again. That's when I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to confront Chloe outright anymore. I wasn't going to beg my parents to understand. Instead, I would let her dig her own hole. I would. Stay calm, keep records, and position myself exactly where I needed to be. Because eventually, she was going to go too far. I could feel it building. And when she did, when she crossed that last line, I would be ready, not just to defend myself, but to make sure she could never use me or her kids as pawns again. The setup was complete. All I had to do was wait for her to make the fatal mistake. It came on a Saturday night, the kind where you can sense trouble before it even arrives. I was in the middle of cooking dinner, something simple, pasta with garlic and olive oil, when the pounding started on my door. Not a knock, not even a ring of the bell. Pounding, heavy, insistent, entitled. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know it was Chloe. I let her pound for a full minute before I opened the door. She stood there, makeup smudged, hair wild, the twins clinging to her legs like shadows. "You're taking them," she barked, shoving their backpacks forward. "No," I said simply, my voice even. Her eyes widened like no one had ever dared tell her that word before. "Excuse me." I didn't raise my voice, didn't flinch. I said, "No, you need to make other arrangements." That was all it took for her to unravel. She launched into a tirade right there on my porch, voice raised so loud the neighbors peeked through their curtains. "You're pathetic, Alex. Selfish. You've always been a failure, and now you can't even step up for your own family. Sarah and Robert were right about you. You'll never be worth anything." The twins shrank back, their eyes wide, while Chloe ranted. I didn't argue. I let her scream, and when she threatened again, "Fine, I'll call the cops and tell them you abandoned them. See how you like explaining that?" I only nodded slowly. "Go ahead," I said. "But before you do, you might want to know that I've been documenting everything. Every text, every voicemail, every time you left the kids with me without asking, even the night you left them alone on my porch. I have dates, times, screenshots. I've spoken with a lawyer, so if the police come, I'll be ready to show them exactly what's been happening. Do you really want CPS looking at your record, Chloe?" For the first time, her words caught in her throat. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. You wouldn't." "I would," I said calm as stone, "because I'm done being used. I'm done being your scapegoat. And if you try to drag me down, I'll make sure the truth comes out." The silence that followed was electric. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to spit venom, but the venom wasn't there anymore. Not when she realized I wasn't bluffing. I crouched down to the twins' level, keeping my voice soft. "You two should go with your mom tonight." "Okay. This isn't your fault." They nodded nervously, clutching their backpacks. Chloe sputtered, but she was cornered. She grabbed the twins' hands, yanked them toward the car, and hissed, "This isn't over." But deep down, we both knew it was. The next day, I took the final step. I forwarded a small portion of my documentation, just enough, to Sarah and Robert. A few screenshots of Chloe's threats, a photo of the twins left alone on my porch, a voicemail where she screamed about dumping them on me whether I liked it or not. For once, they didn't call to scold me. Instead, Sarah's voice on the phone was quiet, almost trembling. "Alex, we didn't know it was that bad. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. I just said, now you do." From that moment on, the calls from Chloe slowed. The surprise drop-off stopped. Her tone shifted. She wasn't bold anymore. She was cautious, careful, as if afraid I might unleash everything I had. And in a way, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Not yelling, not fighting, not stooping to her level. Just standing my ground with the truth in hand and letting her realize she could no longer control me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the family doormat. I was the one holding the line. But the fallout, the way my parents reacted once the full truth came crashing down, and the way Chloe scrambled when she realized the golden child pedestal was finally cracking, that was a storm of its own. It didn't come all at once. It trickled in slowly, like cracks spreading across glass until the whole pane shatters. The first real sign came the following weekend when Sarah and Robert invited me over for dinner. I almost didn't go. I expected another ambush, another round of guilt tripping, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, the mood was different. The table was quieter than usual. The air heavy. Chloe wasn't there. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Robert finally cleared his throat. "Your sister's upset," he said carefully. "She says you've been difficult, but after seeing those messages..." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded faintly. "Well, we think maybe we've been too hard on you." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest thing I'd ever heard from them. I didn't argue, didn't gloat. I just said, I needed you to see the truth. The truth worked its way through, piece by piece. Chloe stopped dropping the kids off entirely. At first, I thought she was just regrouping, but then I heard from a mutual friend that she'd been forced to explain herself to a social worker after one of the neighbors reported her screaming fit on my porch. Apparently, someone had recorded it on their phone, kids crying in the background, and sent it in. Combined with the evidence I'd gathered, it was enough to put her on notice. She called me once after that, her voice small, stripped of its usual fire. "You didn't have to go that far," she whispered. I answered calmly, "You left me no choice." Then I hung up. The golden child pedestal she'd stood on for 30 years had finally crumbled. Sarah and Robert no longer treated her word as gospel. They started checking on me, directly, instead of running through her. At family gatherings, I noticed the subtle shift. When she spoke, fewer people nodded automatically. When I spoke, people listened. The balance had changed. As for me, I kept living my life. Work was thriving. My home was mine again. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I still saw the twins occasionally, but on my terms. Short visits, fun outings, no strings attached. And you know what? They were happier, too. When they came over, they laughed, played, and didn't look at me like I was some reluctant babysitter. They just saw me as Uncle Alex. Months later, at a family barbecue, I stood in the yard watching Chloe sulk at a picnic table, glaring at me while Sarah refilled my plate. The old me would have felt guilty, would have tried to smooth things over. But not anymore, because I had finally learned the truth. Family isn't about being used, manipulated, or sacrificed on someone else's altar. Family is about respect, and when they don't give it, you have every right to take your life back. As the sun dipped low and laughter carried across the yard, I caught Chloe's eye. She opened her mouth like she wanted to start another fight. But then she saw the look on my face, the calm, unshakable resolve, and she went quiet. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one silenced. I turned away, smiling, and thought to myself, I didn't just win. I finally got free. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a line with family, even when it felt impossible? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.